Hey, hi. Great to be back in my office. My daughter's just headed back down to university, so I am back in my space. My name's Tracy. I'm a qualified counsellor, leadership coach, and recovering control freak. And if you're anything like me, you'd rather move forward than linger in, I don't know, the ache of something that's ending. But what happens when the ending comes anyway? You have no control over it. Well, in my first year of living in Bali, I expected rest, tropical beauty, and a sense of new beginnings. But instead, I found myself grieving the loss of people I loved, dreams that I'd invested in, a version of my life that I thought was unfolding. So much of me had been woven into what I was building, into who I thought I was becoming. And when it all began to unravel, I didn't just lose what I'd planned. I realized that I had lost a part of my identity. And in that space of uncertainty, my daily rhythms became an absolute lifeline. Rhythms like taking long beach walks and, of course, my devotions. And it was here that I found myself in Abraham's story. The story was at that point where Sarah, his wife, had died, and he chose to honor her by purchasing land full price to lay her to rest. He didn't negotiate, he didn't rush through that moment. He created sacred space for what was. And what was an ending. And with that ending came grief. That image really struck me because letting go isn't about pretending that, it's happened, didn't matter, let's move on, what's done is done. It's about honoring that moment enough to release it fully. Now, my mantra in that season of grief and loss, when there was lots of tears, I'd often just find myself tearing up and crying. My mantra became, it hurts this much because I loved that deeply. And I refuse to make that a bad thing. Now, in this series, we're exploring thresholds, this sacred space between what was and what's next. And this series has come out of lots of conversations that I've had with people. And one of the most critical parts of crossing any threshold well is letting go, that process of letting go. But how do we do it? Because letting go isn't always about rejecting the past or just moving on from it. Sometimes it's about honoring it enough to intentionally release it. And often we move too fast and we skip over endings. And it's not until we look back on them that we realize how significant that closure was or could have been. But there's a real grace in acknowledging the sacredness of a season that's finished. Poet David Wyatt says it this way: the ability to be wholehearted in sorrow is the same capacity that allows us to be wholehearted in joy. So let's look at what does it look like to let go with grace. Letting go with grace involves 3 invitations. The first invitation is to actually name what's ending, because endings feel messier when they're unacknowledged. Whether it's a job, a role, a relationship, a dream, or like myself, a version of yourself, naming it gives it dignity. Naming it gives dignity to the grief and the loss that you might be experiencing. It allows you to consciously honor the meaning that it held and the space that it occupied in your life. For example, naming the loss of a leadership role might uncover the deeper ache of losing purpose or maybe influence, even. Recognizing the end of a season of friendship might help you grieve not just the person, but the way that you felt really seen by that person. Naming helps you validate what mattered so that you can release it with intention rather than denial. The second invitation is to feel the fullness of the loss, not just wrap your head or process it cognitively, but feel the fullness of the loss. Letting go doesn't mean pretending that it didn't matter. It means allowing the ache to speak of love or loyalty or meaning, and learning not to shame ourselves for feeling so deeply. Psychologically, this is the act of emotional regulation and integration. When we let ourselves feel grief fully without judgment, we prevent it from being suppressed or redirected in unhealthy ways. Naming and feeling our emotions, as sucky as they might be in the moment, help the brain to process the experience as real and complete, reducing the likelihood that, that emotional residue will stay and it will show up later on as anxiety or bitterness or maybe even burnout. The fullness of grief becomes the bridge to healing, not because we avoid the pain, but because we move through it with self-kindness and awareness. The third invitation is to really choose what you're going to carry forward. Not everything has to be buried. Sometimes we can choose to carry forward the values, the lessons, the memories, even as we release the structure. Abraham buried Sarah, but he carried forward the covenant. Neurologically, your brain uses past experiences to construct predictions about the future. The brain loves predictable patterns. So integrating meaningful memories helps create new mental frameworks that support emotional resilience and healthy decision making. When we reflect on what matters and bring it forward intentionally, we reduce the brain's threat response and increase our sense of continuity and safety. Letting go with grace is about honoring the past without dragging it into the future, allowing the best of what was to inform who we are becoming. So, biblically, we see moments of deep lament and ritualized grief. Moses mourned for 30 days. David wept. Jesus wept. God is not afraid of our grief and our loss, of our emotions. Spiritually, grief is not weakness. It's a form of worship when we offer our sorrow to God. Psychologically, Dr. Pauline Boss coined the term ambiguous loss. Now, this is the grief that we feel when something isn't, I don't know, like clearly defined or publicly acknowledged or recognized. This could be the ending of a dream, a shift in identity, or a relationship that just faded without any sense of closure. These losses often go unvalidated by other people, which can make the grief feel isolating and confusing. Thresholds often hold this ambiguity. We may not even realize that we're grieving. We just feel an ache, the ache that something's changing, something's shifting. And that's why naming and honoring what's ending is so important. It helps bring clarity to what feels murky. And in doing so begins the process of healing. So let's pause here. Take a deep breath and ask yourself, what am I being invited to release? What am I being invited to release? Is there something or someone I need to grieve, not because it was bad, but because it mattered? Does it look like, what does it look like to honor what's ending without clinging to it? If you haven't already, can I encourage you to download the Thresholds checklist? There's a section that guides you through this process. And maybe today your step isn't moving forward. Maybe it's creating space just to lay something down with reverence. You know, you don't have to rush your way through endings. There is a beauty in the slow blessing of goodbye. Letting go with grace is not weakness. As I've said, it's a strength wrapped up in reverence. Next episode, we'll talk about crossing over, how to step into the new with courage and clarity. But for today, download the Thresholds checklist, maybe leave a comment, what spoke to you the most, subscribe so that you are notified when the next video comes. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love you to do the journey with us. Healing happens when we honor what was, even as we prepare for what's next. So till next time, it's bye for now.